Okay, so starting off today's show, we will do the same thing that we do every Tuesday to start off the Zach Curl Sports Podcast, and that is my State of the Union with my top 10 takeaways of the week from week 14 of the NFL season. So without further ado, boys, hit the music. Here we go. Takeaway number one. The Cleveland Brown-Baltimore Raven Monday Night Football game was the game of the year. And I totally understand. We've had plenty of other good ones. It kind of reminded me of that Seattle-Arizona Sunday night game from a couple weeks back earlier in the season when Russ and Kyler just went back to forth, blow for blow in overtime. And if you remember, Arizona actually ended up winning that game. And I did think for a little bit last night, Cleveland had a legitimate chance to win this game as well. I was really impressed with the way Baker Mayfield played. The run game for Cleveland was unreal. And I'll even say this. We're going to get a little more deeper in detail into this towards the back end of the show, but I was impressed with Lamar Jackson. I know his numbers didn't look great, and long-term, from a passing perspective, by the way, his numbers didn't look great, and from a long-term perspective, I'm not entirely sure if the Baltimore Ravens could win a Super Bowl with Lamar Jackson as their quarterback, but at the same time, there's no denying he does know how to win games in the regular season. There are so many other quarterbacks in this league that have not won nearly as much as he has, and he deserves credit for that. Coach Harbaugh also deserves credit for coming up with the game plan and really has become willing to build his offense around Lamar Jackson, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done. Last year, the Ravens proved that they could zig when the rest of the league zagged, and it actually ended up paying up for them big time. Really gutsy win for the Ravens. And Justin Tucker, by the way, that's a weapon no other team in football has. Takeaway number two. The Bears cannot fool themselves after Mitchell Trubisky had one good game. And I totally understand. In this kind of game against Deshaun Watson, the quarterback that the Chicago Bears decided to pass on instead of Mitch Trubisky, this had the chance to be really, really ugly for the Bears, especially when you consider the brand of football that they've been playing over the last couple weeks. But for the first time in a while, the Bears actually showed up to this game ready to play, ready to go, and Mitchell Trubisky played really well. It could have been, probably it was, the best game of his NFL career. But at the same time, I just don't think the Bears should fool themselves. The Houston Texans are one of the 2 or 3 worst defenses in the NFL. They cannot stop the run to save their lives. If you were watching the game, David Montgomery took one to the crib to start off the game, and it just hit me from there. Wow. The Houston Texans were just not ready to play, and the Bears took full advantage of it. And they deserve credit for that. And as crazy as this sounds, the Bears are actually still somehow, someway alive for that final wild card spot in the NFC. Arizona and Minnesota, who were the 2 teams in front of them, have been very up and down as of late. We'll see what Arizona could do after they picked up their big win over the New York Giants. That was their first win in a while, and it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of it goes. Right now, Chicago and Minnesota are both 6-7. The Cardinals are 7-6. So it's really those 3 teams fighting for that one spot. And could you imagine, after all the Chicago Bears have been through this season, if somehow, some way, under Matt Nagy, they find themselves in the playoffs? I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but weirder things have happened. That's all I'm going to say. And even if they do make the playoffs, the Bears just better not fool themselves and bring back Mitchell Trubisky next year as their starting quarterback, because they'll regret it. Ryan Pace has already made the mistake once. Don't do it again. Takeaway number 3. Props to the Philadelphia Eagles, and Jalen Hurts really was able to provide a spark for this Philadelphia Eagle team against the New Orleans Saints. And the thing that I really liked about this game from a Philadelphia Eagles perspective was the fact that Jalen Hurts and the offense played their best game in a while. That was the first time in a couple weeks where we've really seen the Philadelphia Eagles offense humming. You kind of were reminded that Doug Peterson isn't actually an idiot each and every game. He could call plays effectively, and the Eagles reminded you of that. And the one thing I really liked was that their defense took some of that energy from the offense, and it provided them a spark. You guys know, if you listen to this show, I've never been the biggest Taysom Hill fan. I've never been the biggest Taysom Hill believer. But at the same time, I do feel like going into this game against Philadelphia, Taysom was playing really good football, albeit 2 games against the Falcons and the Broncos, who didn't even have a starting quarterback at the time. But I was impressed with what the Philadelphia Eagles on the defensive side were able to do, limiting Taysom Hill and really being able to feed off the energy from the offense. And we'll see what the Eagles can do going forward. This is going to be another game that we talk a little bit more about in detail later in the show. And the Eagles are another team that somehow, some way, the NFC East division title is not completely out of the picture. And in terms of New Orleans, it's a tough loss. The fact that you now do not have access to the number 1 seed in the NFC or home field advantage without gaining a little bit of help, and the Green Bay Packers losing, that's not ideal. And when you look at the Packers schedule, it's not terrible, but it's not awful. I know they have a Sunday night game at home against the Tennessee Titans, even though Tennessee's really good. If you're the Packers, that's a game you expect to win. You have Green Bay at home against Carolina on Saturday, and then Green Bay will close the season at Chicago. So the Saints and the Packers, the race for that number 1 seed, will get really interesting really quickly. Takeaway number 4. The Pittsburgh Steelers looked awful on Sunday night. I'm not going to deny that. And most of this blame is going right to the offensive side of the ball. And if you've listened to the show, you'll know I've been a big Ben Roethlisberger supporter throughout the season. I believe if it wasn't for Alex Smith and his miraculous comeback, and we all know his story, that Big Ben should be comeback player of the year if it wasn't for Alex Smith. But at the same time, Ben Roethlisberger was not good on Sunday night against the Bills. He was not good against the Washington football team. And I don't think the Steeler team is going to be successful until they realize, in order for us to win, in order to be dynamic on the offensive side of the ball, not only do we need a running game, but we need a quarterback that's able to make big dynamic plays instead of these screen passes. And the screen pass dink and dunk offense is fine, except one, it's not like the Steelers receivers are catching the ball. In order for that to be executed, guys like Eric Ebron, guys like Deontay Johnson, they're really going to have to be able to stop with these drops and hold on to the ball, because that is one aspect that is just killing the Pittsburgh Steelers in these games. And if I'm a Steeler fan, the unfortunate thing for me would be that on Sunday Night Football against the Buffalo Bills, I actually thought their defense played really well. Their defense is a defensive unit that is super banged up. We all know who's been injured over the last couple weeks with Bud Dupree, with Devin Bush, but Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, and company, at least in the first half, were able to get to Josh Allen and get the job done. But then Ben Roethlisberger on that pick 6, that really changed the game. And Pittsburgh is another team. A lot of people are saying, oh, they remind me of the New England Patriots from last year, and maybe that's the case. And I get it, but the Steelers did have better wins than last year's Patriot team did. The Steelers went into Tennessee and won. The Steelers went into Baltimore and won. And I do think if they could build some momentum these next 3 games, they are still a team to watch and a threat in the AFC. Takeaway number 5. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are another team. What exactly do they do well? And I totally understand the Minnesota Vikings did not look particularly good in this game, and the Buccaneers won. But at the same time, if the Minnesota Vikings have a different field goal kicker, I feel like the outcome of this game could have been very different. After the game, Bruce Arians comes out and says, we can do whatever we want when it comes to our identity. We could throw the ball, we could run the ball, we could do anything we want with the amount of talent we have, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Well, I gotta ask you, Bruce, if that's the case, then why aren't you doing anything? Because we all know it's the same thing with this Buccaneers offense. They had the least time of possession in the NFL on Sunday by far. And once again, I really do believe that if the Minnesota Vikings had a different field goal kicker, the outcome of this game could have been much different. Dan Bailey missed a couple kicks, and it cost Minnesota. Tom Brady didn't look particularly great in this game. I'm not a huge fan of Bruce Arians and Byron Leftwich's play calling. And I think right now, when you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're like a country club team. There are all these players, super, super talented, but it's not like they're going to be able to get anything done unless they improve on their chemistry from the time from now to the time we hit the playoffs. But the problem is, it's week 15. It's going to be, if the Buccaneers were going to solve their problems, I just think they would have done so already. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the playoffs, because we all know when it comes to Tom Brady in the playoffs, it's a different animal. He is the GOAT. He wants to win more than anyone else. But at the same time, when I look at the rest of this Buccaneer roster and the rest of this Buccaneer team, I'm just not necessarily sure if they're all on the right page to make a big Super Bowl run and win 3 playoff games in a row, I am selling stock in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now. Takeaway number 6, Ron Rivera. That's my coach of the year. What this guy has been able to do with the Washington football team is really remarkable. Let's not forget, Ron Rivera is a head coach that he went to Carolina and he did a great job really rebranding their culture and really turning them around. And he would always have really, really good defenses in Carolina. And for me, that's why I thought the coaching hire by Washington to go get him was such a good move, because that defensive personnel is special. We all saw what Chase Young was able to do on Sunday against the San Francisco 49ers, taking one to the house. The linebacker Apke has been playing phenomenal. They also have a bunch of Alabama kids, John Allen, Deron Payne, Sean Dion Hamilton. That Washington football team defense is really good and is a unit to watch, being led by Chase Young. And following the Giants' loss to the Cardinals and the WFT's big win over San Francisco, the Washington football team right now is in first place in the NFC East. And right now, if you were going to make a prediction, most people would say the WFT are the favorites right now to win the NFC East. Now, back to Rivera. This is a coach that has beaten cancer earlier this season. This is a coach that lost his starting quarterback in Dwayne Haskins. We all kind of knew it wasn't working out. Kyle Allen then goes down. And then who is the Washington football team quarterback to save the day? You guessed it, Alex Smith, the same guy that earlier this season we just straight up had no idea if he was ever going to play the game of football ever again. And with some of the skill position players they have, Gibson and McLaurin, their offensive line is steadily improving. I like this Washington football team being led by Ron Rivera, being led by their defense. I understand the NFC East isn't the best division, but if even Washington could go 8-8 with the sexual harassment clause against the team before Rivera got there as well, he's doing a phenomenal job. Right now, if I had to vote, Ron Rivera would be my coach of the year. Takeaway number 7. The Los Angeles Rams are a legitimate Super Bowl contender, and I really don't want to hear anything otherwise. I think if there could be a team in the NFL that could beat or at least match up with the Kansas City Chiefs, it's the Los Angeles Rams. And I'll start off by saying this. The Rams defense, if you didn't know so already, yeah, it's elite. And I'm not just talking about Aaron Donald. I'm not just talking about Jalen Ramsey. I'm talking about that defensive unit as a whole. Troy Hill and what Brandon Staley and the rest of that Ram defense has done has been really impressive. I think Brandon Staley, sooner rather than later, is going to be a head coach in this league. And what Sean McVay was able to do against the Patriots was super impressive. We all know what exactly the storyline was for not only the Rams, but the Patriots as well going into this game. These two teams met in the Super Bowl a couple years ago, and Jared Goff could literally do nothing against Bill Belichick's defense. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. And I was so excited by what Sean McVay was able to scheme up, really building this Rams team around not only the pass game, but some of the running game, and it's a really balanced attack. You remember a couple years ago when the Rams made that Super Bowl, the main reason why the most dynamic player on that team was Todd Gurley for most of the season. He was running all over the place throughout the season, and it's not like Jared Goff was bad, but I think now you could really make the argument that he is better now than he was back then, and that's a sign of a good coach. A sign of a good coach is being able to adjust the offense in many different ways in order to be successful, and that's exactly what Sean McVay and the Rams have done here in this situation. I love the way they're playing as of late. I understand they had the hiccup against San Francisco, but historically the Rams just don't match up with San Fran very well at all. What they did to the Patriots was super impressive. They have a game in Seattle in a couple weeks that could really determine who ends up winning the NFC West. That game's going to be huge. I do think the Rams are a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Takeaway number 8. The Kansas City Chiefs are a really good football team. I think we could all agree. I think we could also all agree that right now, if you were to ask, okay, who is the consensus favorite to win the Super Bowl? I would say the Kansas City Chiefs. But I do not want to hear this notion again that these guys are all of a sudden unbeatable and no one can beat them and they're just automatically going to repeat. Because number one, we all know it's very hard to repeat. No team has repeat since the New England Patriots did in 2003 and 2004. But at the same time, I just feel like when you watch the Kansas City Chiefs right now, You could say they're bored, I get it. They have the NBA team syndrome. But let's face the facts. In the fourth quarter of that game against Miami, they got run over. Tua looked like the better player. Miami's defense was making plays and plays and plays, and I totally understand that you can make the argument of Patrick Mahomes threw 2 interceptions in the first quarter. He took that 30-yard sack, and the Chiefs were still winning by the half. Tyreek Hill, Pat Mahomes, Mecole Hardman, they still all had great games. I'll also acknowledge that the first interception Mahomes threw, unfortunately for Miami, they were not able to take full advantage of it as Jason Sanders missed a field goal. So Miami had plenty of opportunities to win this game. The Raiders, they beat the Chiefs the first time, and they obviously had many opportunities to beat the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday Night Football a couple weeks ago. I believe the same thing can be said about the Denver Broncos. Last Sunday night, they put up a nice battle with Kansas City. So, is Kansas City the favorite to win the Super Bowl right now? Yes. Is Patrick Mahomes absurd? Yes. Is that offense absurd? Yes. But I wouldn't be shocked if they don't win it. They're not unbeatable. Right now, I'm taking the field over the Chiefs in terms of who is winning the Super Bowl. Takeaway number 9. The Arizona Cardinals are good when Kyler Murray runs. And I totally understand that. I believe last week against the Los Angeles Rams, straight up, he just did not look very healthy. And that took Cliff Kingsbury's ability to run with him away. And I think as a whole, that really showed on this Arizona Cardinal offense. In order for Arizona to be at their best and to peak, they're going to need Kyler Murray to start running the ball a little bit more, and I totally understand he was hurt, and you want him to be 100% healthy by postseason time. But if you're Arizona, here's the problem with that logic. Right now, there are no guarantees that you are a playoff team because you lost to the New England Patriots. I understand it's the Patriots and Bill Belichick against a young quarterback, but that's a game that if you're a legitimate playoff team and you don't want any worries about your spot, that's a game that you win. I believe the same thing could be said about the game against the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams are really good, I get it, but that's a game at home. If you want to make a statement, divisional game at home, that's a game I believe Arizona should have won, but I'll give them credit. Being able to go into New York yesterday against one of the hottest defenses in the NFL and just frustrate them drive after drive after drive. I mean, I understand in the game, Daniel Jones didn't necessarily look very healthy, but at the same time, you kind of felt a couple minutes in that this was the Arizona Cardinals game to lose. And we'll see what happens with the Giants. They still right now are in the mix for the NFC East title. They did beat Washington both times, so they'll have a tiebreaker. The only issue is that right now Washington is one game up and the Giants' schedule is tough going forward. They still have to play the Ravens on the road, so that may be tough. But Arizona, man, just keep running the ball with Kyler. You want to get DeAndre Hopkins more involved a little bit. That was also a pretty good defensive effort from the Arizona defense. Vance Joseph's unit, they've been really struggling as of late. So we'll see what Arizona does to end their season. They'll have an interesting test next week with the Philadelphia Eagles at home. I think right now they're a playoff team, but they need to be careful, quick. And takeaway number 10, the most underrated team in the NFL could be the Indianapolis Colts. They have an underrated coach. They have an underrated offensive line, and I understand everyone really regards Indianapolis as one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, but I don't think they deserve enough credit, specifically by a name-based value like Quentin Nelson, Mark Glowinski, Braden Smith, Anthony Costanzo. These guys are getting the job done for this Indianapolis Colt team, and it's super, super impressive. And the way they were able to just run the ball completely down the Raiders' throat on Sunday was super, super impressive. I think right now the race for the AFC South is as wide open as ever. We saw what Tennessee was able to do against Jacksonville. You have Derrick Henry out here just running the ball all over the yard, and these two teams split their 2 regular season meetings. So it's going to be interesting to see Indianapolis or Tennessee. Who wins the division? Who gets in as a wild card? And would it make that big of a difference? Because I'm going to be very curious to see if you're Tennessee, if you're Indianapolis, in the first round, would you rather want to match up against the division rival that you've split with during the regular season, or a team like the Buffalo Bills that, as we know, Tennessee beat up pretty handily? But that Colt defense is also really underrated. That play by Kenny Moore in the end zone. I mean, are you kidding me? Darius Leonard, DeForest Buckner are one of the best 1-2 combos on the defensive side of the ball in the NFL. You also have to love the way Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines have been running the ball. Taylor had a long touchdown in this game. And even Phillip Rivers. I was a guy that going into the season, I did pick the Colts to win the division, but I predicted the Colts to win the division based on everything around Phillip Rivers. And he's doing everything he needs to do right now. Not taking too many chances, but at the same time, still playing very good football. He deserves a lot of credit, and I think he should be another guy in the conversation for Comeback Player of the Year. As for the Raiders, a lot to be disappointed about. Again, after that game against the Chiefs, you really had an opportunity to establish yourselves as a playoff team, one of the more consistent teams in the NFL. It doesn't help when you lose to Atlanta by a lot, barely beat the Jets, and then get run over in your own building by the Colts.